What is happening, fishers?
Dina from Untraceable Fishing, yet tonight once again with
Jared from Bulamoria Fishing Tackle.
and welcome to
Tackle Tuesdays.
Anyway, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, everyone else out there. Something a bit different we can do tonight, something we've done before, Jared.
Yeah.
A lot of questions coming through. What hooks do I use? What swivels do I use? We're not going to go into brand specifics tonight. How I set up my different traces, what different species I'm targeting.
Yes.
I'm going to run through. So these are the species that I target and fish for, guys. There are a lot of other species out there. I'm not going to go into them. I'm no good at catching Kalyun. I don't know that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're not going to worry about Kalyun. I'm going to worry about the species that I'm specifically targeting. The hooks, the swivel I use, and the exact leader lines and things that I use. I'm not saying it's the right way. This is I found it works best for me.
Yeah, it's your preferred way of fishing.
My preferred way of fishing.
Yes.
Jared's going to jump in with the ways. This is my stuff laid on the table. Jared's going to jump in and tell us about his ways if they're slightly different or things like that.
Very similar, but one or two differences, but we'll get there.
So what we're going to do for you, we're going to run my main target species when I go fishing are bronze bream, blacktail if I'm looking for some panfish.
Yeah.
And then from there, obviously, my two muscle cracker species, silver stemrus, black stemrus.
Mm.
From there, we move on to shad. From there, we're going to move on to cob. Cob gets very complicated. I think I overcomplicate things, but it's just the way I like doing it. And then I'm going to move on to my smooth hounds and my spotted gullies. And then I'll move on to my toothy critters, my non-edible fishing.
Yeah.
The way I run things. So we're going to start off at the bottom end of the scale with the smaller fish. Bronze bream, bluefish, blacktail, zebras. I don't fish for Kalyun much. If there is a Kalyun around, I'll fish with him on one of these traces I set up here.
Yeah, you're more than able to catch him on the trace if he bites on your hook.
Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to start hook first. Then we're going to onto the hook snoot. For those who don't know what a hook snoot is the piece of leader line from your swivel down to your hook.
Yeah.
And then the float we use, and then the type of cotton we use. So bronze bream, bluefish. Obviously, I'm going to either be fishing pink prawns, what I pretty much fish most of the time.
Yes.
Or if I'm lucky enough to have some sand prawn around, there are guys using rock bait, white mussel. I like pink prawn and sand prawn as my two favorite baits for the areas I'm fishing. So hook selection, myself personally, that's my number one hook of choice, Daiichi, number one. A lot of guys might think it's a bit small for bluefish. Daiichis are super sharp and they're super strong. You can get massive bluefish on these with no problem. If you do, by any chance, hook into a silver, good luck. But you can get some silvers out of the two.
They are fairly strong. So if you fight a fish properly, you will still be able to land them on that hook.
But I just find that my hookup rate on Daiichi number one is very, very good.
Yes.
There are some guys out there that do like circle hooks with bluefish. I can't catch a bluefish on a circle hook, or I very seldom get it right. So I think most of the guys are either using a 1 or 2-0. I know the Mitsu medium circles is quite a nice hook of choice. The Mitsu lights also work well. I think a lot of the guys like the Mitsu medium. Bit of a thicker gauge, but easier to tie your bait onto.
Yeah.
Especially on a hook, it's a very thin gauge. If you're using soft baits, it tears through the bait quite easily. And then if a small cracker does come around, you have a better chance of landing it.
Yes,
on the thicker gauge. Then my swivel choice for bronze bream and things like that, I go old school 3-way swivel. I do fish a 2-way sometimes, but I think a 3-way swivel is best. You're not going to get your
line wrappage.
There we go. So I think little number 3 is perfect for bronze bream and bluefish in my eyes. Make sure you're just fishing a good quality swivel, best you can afford.
Yeah. And
then when it comes to hook snoot thickness, I like a 0.5. I might step down to a 0.4 if the water's crystal clear. But I think a 0.5 as an all-rounder is more than sufficient for bronze bream if you're using a good quality line. Then when it comes to floats, Jared, I've got 2 different size floats here. Colors mean nothing, but I like pink for some reason.
Most of the guys do end up liking the pink and the orange.
Yeah.
My 2 cents. I think the main reason is if you are using something like a sand prawn or a pink prawn, it's a little bit of a attractor, and it's similar to the style, the type of bait
the color of the bait you're using. Yeah. So if you're using some guys say if you're using a bit of rock bait, stuff like that, I'll fish an orange float.
Yeah.
And fish a pink if they're fishing with a little bit of a sand prawn and something like that.
Or a pink prawn bait, something like that.
So I use 2 different size floats. Kind of weird. I use depending if I'm fishing a very, very small bait, I'll use a smaller float and a bigger float. If the sea is very rough and things like that, I'll go down to a smaller float.
Yeah.
Just find the bigger float causes too much pull on the bait and your bait's washing around a bit too much. So that's just depending on the size of the float you're using.
Also, I find there one thing, if you don't end up fixing your floats, and sometimes your float is too big and you got a lot of current, sometimes that hook can tend to wrap around
hook
your
into the
trace
float.
and get stuck in the float.
Into your float. That's quite
So
correct.
just as a tip, you can use a gummy stopper, or as a cheaper method, I'm sure you do it as well, 100%, a toothpick. Just break a small piece of a toothpick off. Once you've tied your trace on, you just fix your float depending on how far you want it back from your hook. I go like 40, 50 mils. You put a piece of a toothpick in and it just holds the float in place.
And then just if you're using toothpick, guys, I know it sounds kind of silly. I'll push my toothpick from the bottom with the hook side. I find if I hook it on the top, it loops around your line and ends up getting stuck for some reason.
Yes.
The toothpick protruding out the bottom, you get less wrap ups. So something I've noticed over the years.
I fish the same way.
So that's a little tip. When it comes to colors, I use a total different method. I use different colors. I use the yellow, orange, and pink. I like to make my bluefish traces pre-made.
Yes.
So then I've got different length traces, and I can differentiate by the colors. I don't have to take them out the bag and see if it's a short hook snoot, long hook snoot.
Okay.
So that's how I use the colors.
Interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, so that's just the way I use them. Okay, so we've got bluefish and the panfish out the way. Everyone loves catching a mussel cracker, be it a silver stemmerus or black stemmerus. I know Andrew to the right here, busy watching us front row seats. How's it, Andrew? His favorite fish to catch, and he's definitely mastered the art.
Black stemmerus.
Also, two ways. Some guys like using a J hook. Some guys are using a circle hook. I predominantly circle hook 99% of the time, unless I'm fishing a crab.
Okay.
It's the only time I'm using a J hook if I'm fishing a crab.
Yeah.
And the reason I'll tell you why I'm fishing a crab, if I fish a crab, I'll pull the two back legs off the crab. I'll put my J hook through the body of the crab, through the back. So you get the crab sitting down there.
Yes.
Then I'll tie my line onto my hook afterwards, onto the eye of the hook afterwards.
Okay.
And then tie the legs of the crab up to the one side of the line. So you're not penetrating the crab anywhere, crushing its shell and things like that.
Yeah.
And then for that, I fish anywhere between a 6-0 all the way up to an 8-0. The BKK red octopus beak, or your preference of choice. Nice short shank on the hook. Nice, very strong, nice thick gauge hook.
Yes.
For the mussel cracker. And the reason it's not depending on the size of fish I'm targeting. That all depends on the size of crab I'm using. You want that hook shank not to be too small that your line's inside the crab, or not too big that your crab's sliding up and down the hook.
Yes.
So that all depends on the size of the crab you're using. But my favorite way to fish for either of the species is the inline, number 8. If any of you guys have watched that video before, I think it's the hook that I use 99% of the time.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah, I know you might use a 9 or a 7. I don't know what your preferred size is.
No, I also fish about an 8. You're correct in that.
And then silvers and black stemmerus, a lot of guys like using offset. I only use the inline hook. I found with the offset circles, I know if you're pegging a rod, sometimes you're nice, you get hookups. But I've just found, it sounds kind of weird with the offset, especially if the fish is swallowed nice and deep and you're running through the molars. Sometimes the hooker that the offset ends up hitting one of the molars instead of sliding out the mouth because the point's sitting down or sitting up like that.
Yes.
And then actually you end up pulling the hooks out. You know what I mean? You're not getting a good hook set. It's just tipping into one of the molars.
Yeah.
And it's not, whereas the inline circle, it's going to be corner of the mouth penetration. You're not going to hook into one of those molars. It's impossible for you to do that.
Yes.
So that's why I prefer an inline circle. Then what sort of a leader line, hook snoot would you use?
Look, I would generally then use anything from a 0.8 up to a 1 mil.
1 mil, yeah.
So generally 0.8, 0.9. I think if you're fishing an area that you know is very foul, and you do have that chance of a 10, 15 kilo fish, then you could by all means go up to a 1 mil. I know in the past the guys even used to use 1.1.
Yeah.
So I suppose it all depends on the structure that you're fishing in, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you there. So if there are some white mussel cracker, silver stemmerus around, crystal clear water in the day, sea's very flat and calm, I'll go down to a 0.6 or 0.7.
Yeah.
If the conditions aren't too foul. 9.9 is my number 1 choice, all-round choice.
Yes.
But sometimes at night, if you're fishing for black stemmerus specifically at night, I've got no issue with putting 1 or 1.2 mil leader on.
Yeah,
it's not going to spook the fish at
night.
night.
It doesn't make a difference. I've caught my biggest on a steel trace.
Exactly. I've caught some good fish on steel trace. Makes no difference whatsoever. Yeah. They're not sharp for that. And then I've got that swivels in the wrong place. I'm definitely not using those swivels. Then swivel, I normally use I like a Japanese power swivel, number 2. For my silver stemmerus fishing or black mussel cracker fishing. More than strong enough. Profile of the swivel is not too big. It's not going to attract seaweed around and things like that.
Yeah.
Less drag in the water. So number 2 swivel, power swivel is my ideal choice for that. Okay, that gets us out the way. You know what we've got to do, guys, is is the cotton, but let's just get to that at the end rather. Let's
Yeah,
run
we
through
can
them all
do
and then we'll
cotton
run
at the end.
Okay.
That's no problem.
So then what are we moving on to here next, Jared?
So next, I would say we're going on to the difficult. Oh, no. We got the easy topic. This would be probably one of Dean's favorite way of fishing as well. Based on what I'm seeing here, this would be shared fishing.
100%. You couldn't have got that one wrong, eh?
So Dean's got two methods here on the table. The one is a circle. That is a Mutsu Light 4. And the next option, I think, is his favorite at the moment. That is the VMC needle point. So these are the VMC needle points are probably the most popular shape of hook. It's a long shank, brown offset hook.
Quite a heavy offset as well.
Yeah, that for me is still the best shape to use when you're targeting a shad, especially because sometimes they give such an erratic bite that sometimes you get them to the front and they'll spit the hook out. So I find that shape is the best. And then I see you've chosen your
that's what I use, guys.
I know Dean is a firm believer that he rather fishes the nylon, the mono trace, instead of a steel trace. It is a debate going on at the moment, but I don't see anything wrong with fishing the one more.
Why are you definitely not going to get bit? On thin wire, you might get bit if you're not going to get bitten off on wire. I don't mind one out of, I don't even try to work statistics, maybe 1 out of 50 fish bite me off, 1 out of 100 fish bite me off on 1 mil. But 49, at least 50, I'm getting a lot of them, they're not biting me off. Yes, after 1 or 2 fish, I have to change my hook snoot. It gets a bit chafed and a bit bitten up. But I just can't handle that frustration of being wrapped up every second or third throw with the baits wrapping up, and it gets a bit messy. So I've got no time for that. And I also found you get a bit more of a natural flow with the mono, and I just found that my success rate is actually better with mono than it is with steel trace. I'm getting the bigger fish on the mono with the steel trace. I don't know if they can see it, if they're clever or not. Maybe I've got
I think it's maybe the movement.
My thought wrong. I just find the mono. I'm getting better fish on the mono.
Yeah.
And then float choice. A lot of guys use the normal bottle, wine bottle bung, or whatever you want to call it. I prefer ones with a bit more of a streamlined shape. Also in 2 different sizes. A flat sea, I'd use a bigger float. The sea is rough. I'll step down my float a little bit. Also, these floats cause a lot of drag on the water, especially if you've got a bit of a side wash and things like that.
Yes.
So it causes a lot of drag. So only fish as much float as you need to use. I think a lot of guys overfloat their bait. They don't need to overfloat it. There's a lot more drag and causing the bait to have an unnatural movement. Keep your float to the minimum, but as long as it's floating your bait.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to get on to the big debate, cob fishing.
The tough one.
The cob fishing also. Okay, so I've got a lot of different hooks I use for cob. I'll probably make life a lot more complicated. This guy's next to me using one size hook, and they're catching the same amount of cob as me.
Yeah.
So, like we went away this week, and the cob were biting very skittishly. Like the most skittish cob bites I've felt in my life. You were just getting that, and that was it. So I fished when we got there, I fished a 5er Mitsu Circle Light.
Okay.
Nice thin gauge hook, very sharp hook, and a small little bait. On other days when the cob are hitting the rods out your hands, I'll gladly step up to an inline number 8.
Yeah.
Bigger bait, all depending on the size of the size and the fish available that are available to catch and the areas you are. I like starting off the number 5er, a small bait. A big fish is still going to hit it.
Yes.
If I find the fish are plus 5 kilo, 6 kilo fish, it's a bigger shoaling fish, or there are some bigger fish around, I'll definitely step up to a bigger hook to make sure I've got more chance of landing that fish.
Yeah.
And you can pull that fish a bit harder than you can with a 5er, popping your hook.
Definitely.
So I run anything between a 5 and 7.0. Mitsu Circle Light. When I get to the Pacific spot, those are the 2 hooks I carry in my bag for fishing lighter conditions. And then if I am fishing a bit of a heavier condition, there is some brickwork around and things like that, where I might have a chance of picking up a silver or a black stemrus or spotted gully or things like that. In the bricks, if I'm fishing for cob, I like to use an inline circle anywhere from a 6.0 to an 8.0.
I think that depends on probably the bait that you're going to be using.
Exactly. So it doesn't really determine on the size of the cob I'm going to be targeting.
Yeah.
Our cob, we normally catching anywhere between 2.5 kilos. We get some 10 kilo fish now and again.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have those big 15, 20 kilo fish swimming around, but there is a chance of catching them.
Yeah.
But the main reason for the different size hooks, if I'm fishing a bigger profile bait, I'll use a bigger hook.
So like a live mullet or a very big ocky leg.
or a big round squid bait and things like that.
Yes.
I like to keep the diameter of the hook at the bottom bigger than the bait size.
Yes.
I don't want a bait that's bigger than the size of my hook to make sure I'm going to get 100% hook up. Then there's no chance of the bait being in the way, coming out the mouth, opening the fish's mouth further than it needs to, and the hook missing.
Yes.
So that's my theory behind that. If it works, it doesn't. It does. I don't actually know. So hook choice, anything between a 5 and a 7.0, or a 6 and a 9.0. I know some guys even go to 9.0 down in the breed and stuff like that, but they are catching
those 20, 30 kilo cob.
Massive fish. Then when it comes to hook snoot thickness, I run between a 0.6 for very light conditions, if I'm fishing a river mouth or off the sand and things like that, up to a 0.9 if there are going to be bigger fish around, and I might be playing that fish for a long time, I might go up to a 0.9 just for the chafing on the cob. You have little teeth. Yes. Just for the chafing, especially if the fish has changed direction left to right, you might start getting a bit of wear on that line. So just gives you that extra bit of protection. Cob, always only fish for cob with a running trace. Some guys don't. I only fish with cob with a running trace.
Myself as well.
I find it a bit better. And then when it comes to flotation for cob, dangles some guys like long dangles. I like short,
like stout, fatter dangles.
Yeah, something like that, guys. So those are the two dangles I'd use. So that's pretty much the style I'd use on my Mitsu Circle lights.
Yes.
Very small little bait, but that bait will end up turning into a golf ball size with two tentacles coming out of it. Or if I want something a bit bigger, I use a dangle in sort of that sort of shape. Otherwise, if it's not a far throw, just a normal piece of foam hooked onto the hook with a bit of bait around it would see me sufficiently. Okay, guys, so once again, swivel choice. Number 2, inline power swivel for my main swivel. And then a number 4, I would use or a T-swivel for my running swivel.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that pretty much gets the edibles out the way. Jared's going to move on to the spotted gullies, your smaller non-heads, your hound sharks, and things like that. Yeah. So Jared, run us through your setups here.
So the first option, as Dean said, your spotted gullies, your smooth hounds, younger grey sharks, and maybe even a raggy pup. And even sometimes the guys might think it's odd. I might even fish this trace in certain parts of the surf when fishing for a cob, but generally that's depending on your conditions and if you're throwing a live mullet. So the trace that I can already see Dean's looking at here, if I can see correctly, it's either going to be a straight mono trace of a 1.2 mil, or we could be using a bar trace. So that would be the 1 mil, 1.2 mil nylon with a 80 pound or 90 pound wire, either nylon coated or carbon coated. So that would be a bar trace. So a short piece of steel running back onto a longer piece of mono. And then the hook size. So Dean's taken a nano circle. That is a size you can use. I would fish anywhere between an 8er to a 10er.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
I wouldn't fish much bigger than that. The reason why I say I sometimes fish a bar trace for a cob.
Yeah, why would you do that?
I know sometimes we fish down at Xanadu. So that's since the east here by us. And you're fishing for a cob with a live bait, and the younger greys come into the area.
Correct.
So yes, you might not get that 2 kilo, 3 kilo cob. It might be a bit shy of the wire. But when that bigger cob comes along and he sees that live mullet,
he's going to smack it.
He's going to smack it, and he will pick that live mullet up. He's not going to worry about that short piece of steel. And also on another side of things, and I've had it happen before, you pick up a small grey shark, you fight it for 10, 15 minutes, and it bites you off in the front. Every throw you make, you're losing hooks. You're throwing away 10, 15 rand on a hook.
You're damaging sharks with hooks swimming around in the
mouth. So if the conditions are right, and there is a bit of an off color in the water, and I know that the cob aren't that fussy, I will generally then start off with a bar trace. If you see half an hour, 45 minutes in, maybe there's a chap next to you fishing a mono trace and
been a bit more successful
and
than
he's had a bit more success, by all means, take the wire off, fish a nylon trace. But generally on a live mullet, I will start with a short bar trace.
Okay, let's move on to the bigger non-heads.
Yeah, the big stuff. So then we're talking raggies, big greys, bronzies, hammers, big flatfish.
All throwbait stuff, you guys. We're not going to go into a karting and swim baits now.
Just your throwbait stuff.
Here.
So going on to hooks, Dean's chosen a couple of good hooks here. So we got the 10-0 inline heavy circle, the 12-0 inline heavy circle, and then for the really heavy stuff where you're fishing maybe 65 pound,
upwards.
80 pound braid, and you really need to pull a fish and not let them take any line, you go onto the monster circles. They're a thicker gauge. It's a hook that you can trust. Not to say that the PKKs are a braid brand, but you know, sometimes you're fishing for bronzies and sharks that come out of the water. What happens is they jump out of the water, they actually flex the trace, the carbon coated or nylon coated trace around the back of their body, and they tend to open hooks. So if you're fishing for sharks like that can come out of the water, the BKK Monster Circle, much better hook to use because of the thicker gauge. Going onto the wire, you could fish anything from 175 right up to a 250 pound carbon coated or nylon coated. As Dean said, it depends on what you're targeting, the conditions that you're fishing. And then going on to swivels.
Before you run away, just when it comes to the wire, so I'm going to target reggies, I want to target a bronzy. How long do I make my shark trace?
So that largely depends on the angler.
Yeah.
I know some guys go down to 1.5 meters of wire, but that for me depends on your drop length and where you're fishing.
Yeah.
So if you're fishing off the rocks, you can tend to make it a bit longer. If you've got the heart and you've got a bit of a gap behind you where you can swing. Yeah. If you're fishing off the surf and you're wading,
especially if you're doing a deep wade,
yes,
then it might go a bit shorter.
You tend to have to go a bit shorter unless you can sort of flick it back up behind you at a heart and then cast. But my general, I fish between 1.7 and 1.8 meters of wire. I have had one or two non-heads that by the time that you land them, especially a raggy that's eating up the trace, I've had one that by the time I landed that raggy, there was sort of 10 centimeters of wire left
on it. Yeah.
And that was on a 1.7 meter trace. If it was any shorter, he would have bitten me off. So I would make it as long as what you can possibly throw and be comfortable with. As we've said, it depends on your drop lengths. That's something you need to try and sort of figure out for yourself, you know, see what you're comfortable with.
That's another thing. Also, like Jared says, that the shark might bite up the trace sometimes. But besides, even the shark's not biting up the trace, that extra length of steel just gives you extra protection from being cut off.
Yes.
Especially if you're fighting a shark for quite a while. Yeah. Shark have got extremely rough skin, guys. If your braided lead or your mono lead keeps chafing on the shark, wrapping around his head, as Jared says, that shark wraps itself up, the shark flexes.
Or sometimes that tail slap you.
That steel is definitely going to give it extra protection. So as long as steel is possible, I can't throw anything more than about 1.6. I can't throw it. So that's as long as I can go because I can't comfortably throw.
Yeah.
All depending, Jared's got a little bit more reach than I do, I think. Yeah. So as long as you can possibly throw, I think anything between 1.2 and 1.8 meters, some guys can throw longer. I think we'll see through most of that. Okay, Jared, let's move on to swivels next.
Swivels, Dean's just taken the size 2 Japan Power swivel. So I fish a bit bigger. No, I lie. Sorry, it's a size 1. So the size 1 definitely works. This would be as your main swivel. I fish a 1.0 or a 2.0.
Yeah.
That's just my preference because of the way that I tie the wire onto the swivel. And also I find if you're busy grabbing the trace, you can actually almost keep by the time you're grabbing the wire, you almost get the swivel between your hands and it's a better grip.
Yeah.
And then on the running swivel, we've got the Japan size 4.
You can keep that as small as possible.
Yes. So going on to that, the way you generally will make a trace there, the trace is called the full metal jacket. So it's going to be one solid length of wire, and your swivel is going to be running on there. So you can also generally put a bead. So just going back to this, the T-swivel option does also help on your full metal trace, just to prevent your swivel from putting too much pressure and kinking your trace.
Correct. Yeah.
Then lastly, to do your bait presentation, you got 2 options here. You got the plain wire dangle, and then in this case, you got a bit of an odd one, This is a foam dangle, but it's only half a foam.
Or you get a full foam
Or you
dangle,
get your full foam.
dangle. I just find them difficult to pull to my bait. That's what I don't perfectly use them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going on to the full wire dangle, that you're going to use if you're fishing a bait that you want to fish solely on the bottom, or a big head bait, a mackerel head, a bonnie head, a yellowtail
shad head, or whatever you're going to use.
Yes. That's something that you don't want too much flotation on, and it's a lot easier in my mind and in my opinion to rig a head like that. If you're going to do a soft bait, say you're using shad cutlets or fillets or even a yellowtail cutlet, something like that, then the wire dangle with the foam is a better one to use. Because what you'll do there, and that's the way I do it, you only put your dangle onto your hook once you've made your bait. I find that way you can build the bait a lot better. You're going to start to put 1 or 2 cutlets on, cotton it up. Then when your bait's done and your shape's done,
just clip him on.
You clip him on. You're going to push your hook through. You'll see there's a loop with a piece of heat shrink. So you're going to push your hook through there. And then you also just cotton your bait from top to bottom, just to make sure that the dangle doesn't move, because sometimes it can almost twist the wrong way.
Correct, yeah.
And the sharks tend to grab onto the bait and don't get the hook in their mouth.
Because one thing is, Jared, some kind of cotton, also do not, when you cotton it, don't stretch the cotton as much as it can go. Because I've seen a lot of times the guys put too much cotton on. There's too much elasticity and they're reeling and their bait's sitting halfway up the hook.
Yes.
It's pulling all that flesh around the hook.
Yes.
And you're not getting the hook set. So just make sure there's enough cotton to hold it. Don't overkill it.
And going back onto the cotton, we said we were going to start
guys,
on this.
Quick run through of what cotton we're going to use. All of you know that I like a bit of bait cotton. Maybe I use a bit too much. So just going to do a quick run through, guys. So when it comes to bronze bream, bluefish, and your softer baits, a thin or medium cotton. That's my preferable choice. For mussel cracker, got that one in the wrong place. Sorry, guys. Mussel cracker, I'm not using cotton. Unless it's for crab.
Okay.
Then I'm just putting a bit of thin cotton around the crab's legs. That's about it. That's the only time I'm using cotton on mussel cracker, catfish leg. If I'm putting an ocky leg on, I just hook it on. I put no cotton on it.
Yes.
If I'm fishing armadillo or cockle, I don't know what you guys call it, clearcle, then I'm just hooking it on. I'm putting no cotton or whatsoever, or a bit of thin cotton. When it comes to cob, medium or thick cotton, depending on my bait choice. And of course, when it comes to the big heavy critters, to me, the best is the extra heavy cotton, especially on head baits, where the fish have got a bit of fins on them still. Otherwise, it ends up snapping every time you're wrapping your bait up.
Yes.
Otherwise, if you are fishing soft cutlet baits, a bit of heavy cotton. So just make sure you've got the right cotton for the right application. I think if you carry a heavy cotton and a medium cotton, you'll pretty much get
definitely
in any aspect of fishing. Anyway, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, everyone else out there watching, thanks for joining us tonight. So from Dean from Untraceable Fishing.
And Jared from Bulawayo Fishing Tackle.
Cheers.
Cheers.